Well, hello everybody. Welcome into Great Atmosphere here on this Tuesday, March 19th of 2024. Just a couple days removed from our spring equinox of the season. Very excited about that. I have a pretty simple and straightforward video for you today. Just going to be getting into some short and medium term aspects of our forecast and see what some of the next weather systems that are going to be impacting us here in the southeast have in store from us. But before we get into that, I just want to encourage and remind you to subscribe to the channel here. I'll be doing these videos for you about 2 or 3 times a week during the week, just highlighting some of the major features in and around the contiguous U.S. in terms of what our primary weather makers are, along with some occasional deep dive analysis on some larger seasonal aspects, climatological aspects as they kind of come forth. So really encourage you to subscribe, and let's get started. So today we're going to take a look first at our, as we normally do, our overlay true color Kona satellite imagery. So I want one of the fun things I like to do is kind of spot the upper level and lower level patterns based off of kind of the last 12 hours of satellite coverage, and you can kind of tell just based off storm motion, not only the wind direction at various levels, but also temperature. So one of the things that we can observe here, we have two major, I can tell from this, we have two major upper level jets here. So we have our main polar jet coming down from a northwesterly direction, and then we'll have our southwesterly subtropical jet screaming in here. So we have probably an area of convergence right here aloft, which ultimately means that we have high pressure at the surface, which is denoted by our being able to kind of see our land, right? No clouds in the sky, just because of that convergent flow aloft, creating a sinking air mass, preventing a lot of upward motion and convection. So that is kind of where that high pressure system originates. But we can also see that we have more than likely an upper level low here. So we have our main jet streak kind of in this way for the polar region, but we do not see that same kind of motion in the subtropical, which means that this is a much wider jet in this for this particular setup. We also see a good bit of motion here in the deep southwest over the Four Corner states. Some general counterclockwise circulation, which denotes a surface low right in here, as we see motion kind of going in this direction, but it is very subtle, and due to the high amount of topography in this region, not a lot of moisture is coming up and into it. And that, generally speaking, is the synoptic pattern that I'm kind of viewing from this angle. So putting it all together, let's kind of see what that motion looks like. You can see, yes, we do have that motion come down and in. One of the other interesting things from yesterday that I did see is you can see at the very end these streaks right here in Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee. Those are actually prescribed burns from different fire departments that are burning off various brush and whatnot before a lot of the leaves come in and creating a much more potentially dangerous fire situation. They like to get those out of the way earlier, especially in areas where there is not a significant fire danger for the day. But you can see that general motion in the southwest, and then off in the lee of the Rocky Mountains in Mexico and into South Texas is where we saw some organized convection going into late yesterday evening. And then also I denoted that we could see cold. So how you can denote cold, at least here in the mid-Atlantic states, is seeing these gravity waves off of the Allegheny Mountains and the southern Appalachians. Whenever you see these kind of like stationary waves right in that particular region right there, that is cold air aloft that is coming down off of the high continental Canadian prairie over the Great Lakes, and then eventually down into the coastal plain in the mid-Atlantic, where it's much more moist and much more warm thanks to overall Gulf Stream moisture typically coming in at the surface that heats this area a whole lot more. And whenever we get cold air, which is generally more dense than warm air, that mixing motion comes off in the form of creating these kind of fluid-like waves that come down that way. So that's usually the telltale sign that cold air advection is making its way down and into the southeast, which reflects our not very, but generally cooler temperatures here in the southeast today. So let's take a look at what this looks like in this particular view here at the surface. So we do have our surface high, generally circulating over the southeast. We have that upper level. We have the surface low that comes in the form of maybe I can see this particular jet streak right here. So if we do our 4-quadrant model of a jet streak, so we have our primary streak right here for the polar jet, and then split this up into regions of 4 quadrants. Typically, areas within the left exit region and right entrance region are going to be areas of rising motion. Anytime that we get rising motion, we generally expect a low to form at the surface in those particular regions. Generally speaking, it's more of a guaranteed in the left exit region. And I think we can definitely see that in this particular region here. We see that tiny low that has formed over in central Ontario. And then in other parts of the region, kind of hard to tell at the surface level where that upper level low kind of sits in the Four Corners region, but you can definitely tell the high pressure is definitely in place, and we are starting to open up the Gulf a little bit, getting into central and western Texas. So let's take a look at the NWS All Hazards Index. This is generally all special weather statements denoting not necessarily kind of like they're on their toes of. It's pretty much them just saying it's very dry. Potential for fire weather warnings are there, but it's just not as amplified as it is right now because this area did receive quite a bit of rain. The fuel, generally speaking, is not generally available, but it is quite dry in the air, and there is certainly a good amount of wind coming off of coming into this northwesterly direction, which is where we have there. And then we also have our first frost advisory of the day coming out from NWS Birmingham. These generally will definitely start to spread out more and more into the southeast as we go into tonight, where we do expect lows to reach the upper 20s, going all the way down and into southern Alabama and southern Georgia. That will be our biggest, hardest freeze for the spring thus far as meteorological spring goes. So definitely want to be on the lookout for if you already have any plants that have bloomed, or you've already planted crops. I know some farmers and whatnot in the southeast have preemptively planted. This is a potentially devastating event for them, especially if those plants are particularly vulnerable to cold. But farmers definitely know how to handle situations like this. This is not their first rodeo. I also want to take a look at the severe weather outlook going into the rest of the week. We have 2 days that do have a severe weather threat for the southern half of the United States. We have generally the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas under the gun, with a marginal risk of severe weather going into Wednesday, along with the general southern tier of Texas. And then going into Thursday, we do have the general Houston metroplex and central Texas, along with southern Louisiana along the Gulf Coast under the gun for another marginal risk as well, mainly due to the high pressure kind of moving further to the east, opening up the Gulf, allowing a lot more moisture in there, and then interactions with the dry line coming off of the Rocky Mountains. That dry air interaction, along with cool and dry air, katabatic winds coming off of the Rocky Mountains, interacting with the southeasterly Gulf flow, warm and moist air, will ultimately create a significant disparity within the atmosphere on both of these levels for both of these days. And then how that interacts with the upper level trough that we are going to talk about here in a second. That ultimately will be the spark and the initiator to create potentially some all-hazard severe weather issues for those particular regions. So once again, we can take a look at our upper level map here. We did already denote our polar jet and our subtropical jet that are screaming across right now. We do have our area of convergence, which we can see right in this general vicinity here, which is going to highlight our high pressure, which is only going to move off into the east. And then we have the remains of our omega block, which we talked to yesterday. You can see the remains of the omega right here, generally. It no longer has omega aspects. It is more of a kind of high over low at this moment. We have our high pressure centered over the central west, and then we talked about that very small circulation of low pressure that's sitting over the Four Corners region right now, because kind of continuing to be cut off from the primary circulations, and will be moving very, very slowly over the next few days, generally creating a little bit of havoc for the central U.S. and potentially for the southeast, but certainly will not have as many of the severe threats as the central U.S. will, or the south central U.S. will, over the next couple of days. And then looking at what the winds look like at the surface, we can see the general fear and the special weather statements coming out from the various NWS offices in the Mid-Atlantic and the Ohio River Valley. We have accelerated surface winds coming out of the southwest. These are generally more dry in these particular regions due to that high pressure, and we have the end result of the cold front still coming through the Mid-Atlantic, creating a little bit more of a disturbance in terms of creating having more cold air come in from the northwest. But the general rule of thumb here is we have, you can see kind of the general pattern. I would say we have the low here, and then it draws in. The front will probably be right around this region, and then that draws in moisture, and that draws in the winds from the southwest, and creating, and in addition to the high pressure centers that are both kind of like here and here, that general clockwise motion kind of goes in that scenario as well. So kind of working to create an enhanced wind effect at the surface, which is their primary concern, but thankfully not a lot of forcing to develop major systems by any means, with the exception of some mild lake effect that could be occurring right now in those particular regions. So let's take a look at how this particular upper level pattern evolves. We can see here our kind of high over low. We have our high pressure system sitting over the Pacific Northwest, and then our cutoff low, which is sitting over Southern California and the Four Corners region. And then we have our high pressure at the surface, which is sitting over the southeast and the Mississippi River Valley. And this is, once again, this is in the upper levels of 250 millibars according to the Euro. So let's go forward in time and just see how long that cutoff low here takes to kind of both weekend and make its way across the U.S. So we have, this is Tuesday nights, this is Wednesday nights, this is Thursday nights. So you can see it's both going to, the high and low are going to weaken and ultimately create a little bit of a shortwave trough in the pattern. And it's still going into Friday here, and that shortwave still exists, and it's only over Oklahoma at this point. But you can see the effects of it are creating quite a bit of a disturbance in the southeast by this point. And you can also tell where and how the threats for severe weather come from as this becomes more of that kind of shortwave kind of starts, and that low starts to become part of the mean flow again. We have southwesterly flow coming out of this particular region being interacted with cool and dry air at the upper levels. That's going to create a little bit more of a perturbation there, which is going to trigger some potential severe weather. So let's take a look at what the NAN 3 kilometer model is looking at right now. So it might take a minute to load, so just bear with me here. You can generally see here over a Tuesday night, not a lot to write home about, with the exception of some of that lake effect moisture up with that upper level disturbance in southern Ontario. But we really don't see much of anything until we get into Wednesday and into Thursday, according to the NAM, as that low starts to make its way off and into the panhandle region of Oklahoma and Texas is when things really start to kick off. Dryline interactions in the mid-levels as well start to create a little bit more of a disturbance. Surface level, or not even surface level, more like 850, 700 millibar, where that low-level jet kind of sits is going to be the primary moisture transport, and when that interacts with the upper-level surface low disturbance along with the dry line, that's going to kick off some potentially discrete advection out ahead of the storm. Specifically, I'm probably more concerned about Thursday. It all depends on how fast that low gets out. If the low is more slow, then it's going to be more of a problem for the central and west regions of Texas. And then if it's a little bit more fast, it's going to be altogether a more all-hazards threat for the eastern regions into the Houston Metroplex. Definitely concerned about flooding for this as well. Depends on how, once again, how slow it moves and where it decides to stay. Those are all kind of the implications coming out of that storm. But generally speaking, this is just the 60-hour model. And you can see that the primary crux of everything kind of comes down to Texas and Louisiana, potentially into Oklahoma as well. Let's take a look at the flagship models here, going out 10 days according to the GFS and the Euro. We have the GFS model on the left, and we have the Euro on the right. So let's go back in time just a little bit, just to be able to show you the full scope of the system evolution here. So let's get to, this is a Thursday night. You can see that there's initiation all around into central Texas, how that evolves. So we have that open up and into, and this, so we have, this is once again a reflection of where that convection is supposed to occur based off of the trough and ridge patterns that are in place here. So we have our primary, at this moment in time, we do have a trough that's coming down and into the plains. And then we have our little shortwave perturbation that's kind of here, kind of setting off things. And we would have this little trough right here. That's going to interact with this shortwave trough. And by the time that they make their way into the mid-Atlantic states, they're going to be kind of helping each other out in terms of creating a moisture transport vector that's going to actually create potentially quite a bit of rainfall here at the end part of the week for areas of the southeast, all the way up and into New England. And you can kind of see this with both models here. We can see we have that general trough. It's kind of, and then we have the short wave here. They're kind of going to start to kind of do something like this, which creates a much more virulent moisture transport vector right along the coast. And I don't anticipate this to be a major severe event by any means, but in terms of rainfall, we could be in for quite a, definitely an inch or two. For a wide swath of the eastern seaboard, and this is generally a threat for probably Friday mid-afternoon. So that's about 1 p.m. on Friday. Both models are in general agreement, and then we also have, and then that goes pretty much done with the southeast. I would say by Saturday midday, maybe. The Euro's a little bit slower than the GFS. But then it's going to be a little bit of a super soaker for New England as well, as that low kind of creeps up on itself, creates a new low off of the New England coast, and eventually makes its way offshore with the primary high pressure building in behind it. And this is polar jet oriented, so this is going to be quite cold weather as well, going into Sunday, Monday, and into the early work week next. And then we're going to talk about briefly the threat for severe weather going into next week. A lot of people are talking about this online in terms of kind of like the next big severe weather tornado potential producer kind of storm. This is more of your traditional dryline interaction in the spring, severe weather kind of potential tornadic evolution event. Based off of the 10-day model, so obviously a lot of things can change, but a lot of people are already making kind of plans for it. We can see already, though, we have a general line of moisture reaching all the way up and into Wisconsin. And if you haven't noticed, that the area in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas from both models are kind of going to be in this cold pocket right here. So all that moisture from the weekend storm is going to kind of hit that triple point where the moisture is going, or at least the colder temperatures from the cold continental air mass in the prairie is going to be already sinking down and into these states. And it could definitely contribute to a good amount of snow for these regions that are generally snow-starved. One of the least snowy winters that particularly Minnesota and Wisconsin have seen in quite a long time. So the more snowpack we can generate there in the late season, the better for planting. Anyway, so we go forward in time, and you can see Monday, Tuesday, according to both models, is when they have a lot of initiation kickoff. And once again, this is generally, the timing of this is not necessarily fully in agreement. GFS seems to be faster on this one as opposed to Euro with the last one. So certainly, and remember, convection is not very easily displayed with these 10-day models. We would have to get a little bit closer until we can get to the NAM and the RAP model in order to kind of be able to characterize what kind of convection we would see. But we can make inferences based off of the synoptic pattern that we have available to us right now, and that this generally kind of shows some deep troughing that comes off, creates broad southwesterly flow off and into the central plains ahead of it. Depending on how that trough interaction is, whether it's positively or negatively tilted by the time it hits into the panhandle region of Oklahoma and Texas, and how deep actually it goes far south. It could go further south into West Texas, along where the jet streaks are oriented at that time. Those are all things that determine severity of the ultimate forcing. That's going to be out ahead of the storm in the divergent flow alofts kind of zones. So that's just going to be what we're going to be looking at going into the early part of next week for those regions. And then how long, there is a potential for the southeast to be getting some severe storms as well on the backside of it, depending on, if it starts positive, goes negative, like those kind of interactions. But it's a little bit too far out to be able to determine that. But we do see the models kind of wanting to hone in on some kind of precipitation event for the southeast going into the middle part into Thursday of next week. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Let's take a look at what those moisture transports look like according to the precipitable water index here. So we have, generally we're going to be in that warm sector. This is, let's start out on Tuesday just to kind of see. We can see under high pressure, we have very cool and dry air. Pretty much all through Tuesday into Wednesday before the Gulf really starts to open up and into the Mississippi River Valley. We get into that warm sector for the majority of the southeast and the mid-Ohio River Valley and up and into the mid-Atlantic. And you can see what I mean by the time that these two troughs start to really interact with each other. We get a very strong moisture transport vector. Look at some of these PWatt levels all the way up and into over about 1.5 inches PWatts for the spring. That's quite significant for the coastal plain of North Carolina. So certainly a potential for some pretty significant rainfall for regions that definitely need it. And then hopefully, and then New England gets a little piece of that as well. And remember, the cooler the areas are, it's kind of like this scaleless sliding scale. I'd say like a PWatt of like 1.6 here compared to a PWatt of like 1.2 in New England, are going to be potentially about the same in terms of impact level of rainfall. So that's generally speaking kind of like what I'm looking at most in terms of like a significant rain event going into the weekend. We got high pressure building in behind it before that Gulf opens up again, and you can see definitely where that dry line kind of sits here off of in central Texas. That's what a lot of, and you can see this. So we have PWatts that are down and into the 2 inches reading region off of the Texas Gulf Coast, and then you just drive about 30 minutes that way, and you get PWatts that are well under 1 inch. So very, very high disparity between them. Out ahead of the storms as well is where I kind of expect to see a lot of discrete convection as well. And we can see how this highlights in our energy vorticity map. And remember, when we look at vorticity, this is kind of where we see our convective initiation values going into this. So anywhere where you do see kind of like these little areas right here are areas where if other factors are in place, there could be convective initiation in those particular regions. So we do know that the factors are in place. We have a high disparity between cool air and dry air versus warm and moist air. So now we have our initiator here based off the shortwave trough. That's why we have a high potential for convection to initiate in that particular region. But conversely, if you were to, and also a lot of people kind of asked, it was like, how can you spot shortwave troughs when they're not like easily visible via isobars and whatnot? Well, you can take a look at vorticity maps and you can kind of tell where the models are kind of sensing it here. So even though you don't necessarily see a wave on this particular map via isobars, you can see that there is something right here based off some of the discoloration over Iowa. But ultimately, because this air mass in this area is going to be sitting under cool and dry air in totality, there is not going to be enough. There is definitely a forcing available there, but there is not general environmental factors that are going to contribute to creating a significant severe event for the northern mode here. But we can see that shortwave kind of deepens and then interacts with the northern mode shortwave here and starts to kind of envelop one another. And that's where we kind of will see our weekend storm system start to really deepen here as we go forward and into the end of the weekend. Generally for the southeast in particular, definitely more on the early side of the weekend, Friday night into Saturday midday, before this really ships on out and we get a pretty pleasant Sunday on the edge of it. And then this is where the problem comes in for next week. Very deep digging trough comes off of the Rocky Mountains and into central Texas. And we can see, just generally speaking, This is generally, I would say, more neutrally to negatively tilted, and that if we can get the majority of, if the jet streak kind of exists in this moment right here, kind of on that leading edge of wherever that trough axis kind of lies, and then we get diffluent flow aloft out of it, that could kind of open up a pretty all-hazard severe threat going all the way up and into this general tornado alley region for regions all the way up and into Iowa, down and into Texas. So that's kind of the danger here, and we're going to have to definitely watch that going into next week before this all kind of tightens up in the Midwest. I wouldn't totally rule out an Ohio River Valley event as well on the back end of it. We did kind of see the end result of something like that. Triple point kind of event that kind of spread out into the east. I don't want to I don't want to disregard something that obviously happened only 2 weeks ago and kind of threw people through a loop. So I definitely want to be more mindful of that for the Ohio River Valley. And generally speaking, one of the factors there that was a little bit iffy was where the flow was coming out of. That will definitely need to be taken a closer look at going into next week, but we have a full week to look at it, so we already need to kind of make notes to ourselves in the back of our heads to be able to kind of remember that. And then a little bit too far out to kind of see where the pattern will be according to just this deterministic flagship European model. And as far as precipitation goes, I'm just going to look at what the precipitation map looks according to the Euro here, going through the system on the weekend. Generally pretty good perceived values all the way through the southeast. We have generally over an inch, inch and a half, and the coastal regions of Virginia and the Chesapeake Bay region, along with the coastal plain of North Carolina, potentially getting 2 inches or more, in addition to the coastal regions of the Mid-Atlantic and the New England region. So very good, very, very good for this particular region that we're getting that kind of significant rainfall. Kind of a bummer that the Ohio River Valley is left out of this one. We need as much rain as they need, as much rain as they can get. They've gotten a lot recently, but we definitely want to start pushing back on that drought, moving into both the Ohio River Valley and into the Missouri River Valley, and into the Midwest, before we get into the potentially more drier summer months. So hopefully they get some more out of the midweek storm system next week, with as long as they don't get major severe weather out of it. But very good news for the southeast in terms of precip coming through the weekend. And we can already take a look at what the SPC is looking at in terms of potential severe hazards going into next week. This is not going to. They don't ever put up probabilistic maps like this for severe parameters until we get closer. I think the earliest day is day 7. Very rare they do anything past day 4 or 5, and even then it's just they just kind of show you where they're highlighting it. They're not talking about a categorical probabilistic outlook by any means. It's more just general. But in terms of what the WPC or specifically the CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, can put out, they put out heavy precip warnings. Generally speaking, more slight risk of below normal temperatures. We have a slight risk of heavy snow on the back end, and then high winds on the. And this is all for that system going into next week. So everyone kind of knows that in terms of threat level, anything that happens this week is going to be more of a precipitation, marginal risk severe based in the central west. But for us in the southeast and the eastern seaboard, it's mainly a heavy precip event. And it doesn't even get highlighted here at the amount of heavy precip. But next week, we'll have cold air on the back end, which will bring a significant snow threat for the plains, and cold air into the central parts of the contiguous U.S. And then heavy precip, high winds all throughout in the northeastern tier of the states as well. So definitely something to keep an eye on. And then I also want to keep an eye on what we're going to be expecting out of this in terms of after that. So let's take a look at what this looks like. This is according to the European AIFS model, the new artificial intelligence machine learning model that the Euro has put out recently. So you can see that general shortwave trough making its way across the United States, creating a little bit of trouble for us going into the weekend. And then we see that very, very deep low trough that's going to be making its way off and into the states next week. And then on the back end of that, potentially, we see it's one after the other with these kind of spring transitional season storm systems. I can definitely highlight that polar jet kind of reintroducing itself up and into Alaska. Anytime that we get ridging up and into Alaska, it displaces a lot of that cold air, kind of reinforces more of the cold air pattern here, which means that any trough that we get will kind of have interactions with deep polar, even Arctic air coming down from here. So this is all Arctic air that's sitting over the Hudson Valley, and anytime that interacts with subtropical air, you can see this is even more of a dangerous kind of precedent, I would say, even for events preceding next week's storm system, due to, let's see how deep this trough goes according to the, it's still pretty, it's not as deep. It's also got some cutoff low effects as well, which is interesting. But we get southwesterly flow as we open into April, as we open April. So definitely an active pattern, and potentially some slight disturbances for your Easter weekend, according to that. Well, actually, that's quite zonal flow. Looks like the weekend itself and Easter, according to the AI model right now. This is all ensemble experimental stuff, so don't take it. This is just general timings that I'm trying to get around in my head. But going into the week following Easter, we're going to have ourselves another event, it looks like. So definitely something to keep an eye on for sure. The main story, I would say, for the day, at least for my wife, at least, who stepped out the door today in sub-freezing temperatures here in Charlotte, is the temperatures as they sit right now. We have experienced, this is a last 30 days temperature anomaly. This is incredibly warm for the beginning of spring. Some areas are experiencing temperature departures well over 6 all the way up to 13, 14 degrees above normal for regions of eastern Canada. So it's been quite warm and quite mild. And as things are usually with the atmosphere, it is going to self-correct itself eventually, and we have already witnessed the beginning of that. By the time we finished our Costco run last night, the cold front had moved through, and it certainly started to feel like winter all over again. So it's definitely in place. We have Isdar looking at our current surface temperatures across the southeast: 50 in Charlotte, 52 in Columbia, 50 in Atlanta, going all the way, and those 50s, mid 50s extend all the way down into Jacksonville, Florida as well, and then mid 40s in Central Virginia. And the Central Valley, or the High River Valley, is definitely experiencing some very cold temperatures due to that northeasterly or northwesterly cold air advection. 40s right now in the middle of the afternoon here, and then we have some of that Gulf moisture starting to build in, creating a little bit more warmth in the central regions, but certainly nothing to write home about. 58 in Dallas, 58 Austin, all throughout the central Texas regions. 65 up in like Dodge City, Kansas, and Topeka and whatnot, in those particular regions, quite warm. Will be interesting to see if we get more interactions with some peak heating in these kind of areas. Kind of make me concerned that the Panhandle region is going to receive a little bit more of an impact for severe weather going into today and tomorrow. So let's take a look at what the maximum temperatures look like over the next few days. This is an anomaly map for the highs, so we can see very, very warm out into the central areas, but very, very anomalously cold for the region of the southeast and the general south. And then we can see more cold air starts to fill in, kind of a very mild and even above average day on Thursday or Wednesday. And then before we get into Thursday, the cold air kind of returns as that new system kind of makes its way in. On the back end, we have high pressure building in and creating even more cold air. We're expecting even more cold air for the southeast before some very frigid air comes into the northern plains. And we kind of generally are more blue than we are red, which is quite a departure from what has been the norm starting into the season. And then we get into Monday, and then we talked about that Arctic air interaction as the polar jet kind of sinks even further down and in. That is quite interesting that we're already kind of seeing those highs interact. We have from one part, we have areas of southern Missouri at 63, and then areas of northeast or northwest Kansas in the 40s and 30s. Then we have dryland interactions. This is not shaping up to be very good for that particular region going into the middle to early parts of next week in terms of a severe weather outlook based off some of these things. These are all kind of things you put together in the forecast, I suppose. So this is what the SPC does on a daily basis. So and then we take a look at kind of the big story for tonight is the NDFD minimum temperatures outlook. We have 20s, and you can see this white line that extends all the way down. This is what the NDFD is expecting to be the freezing line. Look at that. We got freezing temperatures all the way down into Mobile Bay, which is very interesting. Most of Mississippi underneath freezing. So definitely a significant hard freeze for the early spring planting season that we're going to be experiencing tonight. Definitely If you have any plants that need protecting, or you have animals that stay outside, make sure they're taken care of for sure as we go into the evening. A lot of people might be caught off guard by this due to the fact we've had such anomalously warm temperatures over the past month and a half. So that, generally speaking, is, and this is, and I think I'd put this in there just to highlight kind of where that flow level is. We do have all the air mass that's coming in for today and into tonight is coming from the cold continental air mass that's sitting up in the Canadian prairie. Cold continental air is always going to be much colder than maritime air, because maritime air takes a lot longer to modify. So continental air, much more easy to kind of, it goes and it's much easier to turn very cold and much easier to turn very hot, due to environmental factors. So anytime we have our flow coming in solely from the Canadian prairie down and into the southeast is when we do get our coldest temperatures. So that kind of just shows the highlight in that particular ray. So that's it for the weather. And I do want to highlight one thing. We're under 20 days away from our big solar eclipse event that's going to be occurring here in the United States, extending from the San Antonio region all the way up and into the northern regions of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And generally speaking, bisecting a lot for the majority of the country. I would highly, highly encourage you, if you are within 100 miles of this line, to go and see the totality of this eclipse. It'll be one of the strongest eclipses, and by I mean strong, I mean the sun will be in a solar maximum. So if you have the appropriate sunglasses, you'll be able to see potentially a major solar corona, maybe even some sunbursts coming out of the sun. And I can tell you, me and my wife were eclipse fanatics. We went and saw we went into the totality of the 2017 solar eclipse. I believe we saw that in Anderson, South Carolina, last time, and it blew our minds. We were like, we're gonna go and see every single eclipse that we can and plan out our major international vacations, around eclipses, just because it's so cool. Won't get into it right now. I'm definitely going to be putting out more videos pertaining to the eclipse itself, along with some more short-range forecasts for eclipse viewing as we get closer and closer to the day. It's Monday, April 8th, or in the mid-afternoon hours, is when the eclipse is scheduled to occur. And there's plenty of different there's plenty of different websites to be able to see timings and whatnot for the eclipse itself. It's definitely worth a PTO day and some extra gas to be able to go and see this. We've been planning this trip. Me and my wife, who live in Charlotte, we've been planning this trip to see family friends in Louisville, Kentucky, for about 6, 7, 8 months, and we're going to be driving up and into central Indiana to be able to see it. It's a huge deal, and definitely would encourage you to take the time to be able to go and see it. But I won't get into it right now. Just wanted to remind you, we are under 20 days away. I'm extremely excited, and we'll definitely be talking about a lot more going into next week for sure. So that's it for me today at Great Atmosphere. I do appreciate you tuning in. Do encourage you to subscribe to the channel for more forecasting related topics. I know I said this was going to be an abbreviated episode today, but you just get carried away talking about the weather sometimes. It is what it is. But I do appreciate you tuning in. I hope to see you again later this week for another forecasting video. And until then, you guys take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.